What has happened, everybody? James Hancock here, and back to review the film Bardo, False Chronicle of a Handful of Truths from writer-director Alejandro González Iñárritu. And I know a lot of people like to call him Iñárritu, but from what little I remember of my years of Spanish in high school and college, like 25 years ago, when you have an accent over a vowel, that is the syllable that gets emphasized or stressed. And so if anybody from Mexico wants to correct my Spanish, I will listen, but it always drives me crazy when I hear people call him Iñárritu. As he was introduced at the Paris Theater yesterday, in any event, I'm getting sidetracked. It's not a review of how to pronounce words in Spanish, but it's a review of a film by an absolutely remarkable filmmaker who's been giving us some incredible films over the last 10 years, specifically Birdman, as well as The Revenant. I was pretty much floored by both of those. And perhaps The Revenant was a little overly long, and perhaps Bardo's a little overly long. But there's no denying that Alejandro is one of the more visionary directors alive today. And the fact that Netflix is giving him an opportunity. We're living in this weird era where Netflix, when it comes to their movies, they tend to either make completely, totally disposable movies that nobody can even remember the following week, or they get behind like these incredibly kind of sophisticated, highbrow, like art house directors like Alejandro González Iñárritu. And I guess for me, I always think of Netflix in a very positive light when it comes to their feature films, because they get behind movies like Blonde by Andrew Dominik. But if you look at their entire slate, I mean, their library is not well loved, at least when it comes to their feature films. I feel like they're much better known for the shows, but I always applaud them for taking these big, bold swings with these kinds of films, because it seems like with a lot of aging filmmakers, there comes a time where they want to do a big, giant, experimental, dreamlike film about what it's like to be a filmmaker. And the most obvious example would be Federico Fellini's 8½, one of the most beloved films ever made, and it absolutely lives up to its reputation and is well worth watching many, many times. But other directors like Woody Allen did Stardust Memories, or Bob Fosse, he did All That Jazz. And I love it when a very experienced director decides to make a movie about what it's like to be a filmmaker, struggling to be an artist in a commercial medium. And in the case of this film, you have a journalist / documentarian who is trying to walk that line of political and artistic credibility, but also trying to be successful and make money for his family. But he's looking back at his life as he prepares to accept an award down in Mexico. And don't worry, I'm not going to give away any spoilers, and there's a very important reason why. But this is one of those movies where initially it seems like everything's random, everything's dreamlike, everything's kind of nonsensical. And a lot of directors have made movies like that, where suddenly in the middle of a scene, like a donkey will show up and like barf up a human child, and you're just like, all right, that was some weird fucking shit. But it has no real bearing on the story. With Bardo, what I found fascinating is that it has a structure, but it's a very elusive structure that increasingly becomes clear as the story progresses. And so many little random throwaway beats and details and moments and images that come in the early part of the movie, suddenly it all starts to become clear as to why we were seeing them. And I just sat in the theater just floored by the genius and complexity of the story style and the story structure, because I would have been totally fine with just a nonsensical, dreamlike movie, because the movie is so gorgeously shot, and it's just like all that kind of classic like fishbowl lens and long camera movements where we're just navigating this fascinating life that this guy leads. But in the last third, suddenly I realized I was watching a really good movie. And maybe that's because the two people behind me abruptly got up and left the movie about 2/3 of the way through. As the movie started, every time there was some sort of weird imagery on the screen, these two lovely women would just say, "This is the weirdest movie I've ever seen. This is the weirdest movie I've ever seen." And when they weren't saying, "This is the weirdest movie I've ever seen," they were shoveling popcorn into their faces and chewing with their mouths open. And this is 2 times in a row at the Paris Theater in Midtown Manhattan where I've had bad experiences that are nearly identical, of like middle-aged women eating with their mouths open. I don't know if they're the same women or not, but in any case, I'm going to avoid the Paris Theater when possible in the future. But it's the only theater in New York that shows Netflix movies. But after these people left, I was able to really focus on the movie, and suddenly it all started to become clear. But to be fair, I was really enjoying the movie every step of the way up to that point. And I don't know if this movie is autobiographical at all, but it feels intensely personal because so much of the movie is about a filmmaker wrestling with their career, where half their life is abroad, whether that's the United States or traveling the world, but their core, like what made them who they are, is all in Mexico. But he loves and hates Mexico in equal measure. Like if a gringo is criticizing Mexico, he's the most fierce defender of his country. But when people are celebrating Mexico in Mexico, he's got nothing but criticisms. So he's got a little bit of a Jekyll and Hyde relationship when it comes to his own country. But that's what's so great about the movie, because it just revels in so many incredible sequences that for me were just like this like delirious kaleidoscopic like journey where we're just following this character through all these madcap adventures, going to talk shows, into award shows, into parties in his honor, and that sort of thing. And I was just drunk on the imagery. I was just having so much fun. And as I said before, I don't know how autobiographical the movie might be, but I don't think it's a coincidence that the star, Daniel Jimenez Cacho, looks identical to Alejandro Iñárritu. I mean, or not identical, but really similar hair, similar look, just a similar style. And he's incredible. I mean, he is just an absolutely fascinating central character. I don't know if I've ever seen him in another movie, but I was just absolutely riveted with all of his ideas and perspectives. In particular, his relationship with his family, which is so complex and so heartbreaking. The way he's trying to give his children all these opportunities in life, but at the same time recognizing his experiences being slightly more poverty-stricken as a child are what made him who he is. And so in a lot of ways, he's unable to provide his kids with the experiences that he had, which turned him into the man that he is. And his relationship with his daughter is particularly special because she was born in Mexico, but she's been living in the United States, living in Boston, and she's really trying to get back in touch with her Mexican heritage. And I absolutely love the relationship. But what really steals the show is his relationship with his wife, where after decades of marriage, they are still so horny for each other and just having so much fun and like chasing each other around their home, getting drunk. I mean, it's a very erotic, affectionate relationship that I just found delightful to watch on the screen. Now, a lot of people have criticized this movie for the length, and I think that is totally fair. This movie, I wouldn't say it overstays its welcome, but it's certainly in no particular hurry to get to the end. I mean, it's somewhere between 2.5 and 3 hours long, and I wasn't shifting my seat or checking my watch or anything like that. But if you wanted to criticize it for perhaps excessive navel-gazing or just kind of wallowing on some of the more imaginative, kind of self-indulgent sequences, I think that's absolutely totally fine. But at the same time, this feels like one of those scenarios where a filmmaker is just going for it and they're just holding nothing back. Kind of like when Paolo Sorrentino made The Great Beauty, where that was his great epic. And this seems like this is an epic of a personal nature. It's not an epic like The Revenant, where you've got a guy like struggling to survive and being eaten by grizzly bears and fighting for his life every step of the way. That was a very different kind of film. Bardo is an epic of the human spirit, an epic of the human soul, and just a fascinating look into the life of a director. And we don't often get these kinds of movies. And while I've seen many filmmakers like Fellini and like Woody Allen tackling these big giant topics in the past, I've never seen a movie quite like this, where they mix together like autobiography, history, commentary on filmmaking, commentary on current events, all into one big extravaganza. And some of the commentary on Mexico's complex history is just absolutely fucking riveting, especially the period of the conquistadors, where you've got the Spanish first arriving in Mexico, committing just unnameable atrocities. But that merging of the indigenous cultures and Spanish cultures is what leads to Mexico. Is you can tell that Iñárritu is still wrestling at this point in his life about what it even means to be a Mexican, and he's blatantly still wrestling with what it means to be a filmmaker, where you're trying to be an artist in a commercial medium. And without giving too much away, there's a conversation or an argument or a fight between two characters about halfway through the movie where you have two figures that are successful in their own right who are basically just letting each other have it for what they perceive to be the other person's flaws. And I was just eating it up with a spoon. That was some of the best writing in the entire movie. But my next point is more of a question than an observation. But in this film, it flip-flops back and forth between English and Spanish quite a bit. But there's one word that is never translated where even they'll be speaking in Spanish, but cabron is always written as cabron. Like the subtitle will be everything in English except for that word. And what my suspicion was that I guess the literal translation would be so offensive that no one wanted to include it in the subtitles. And I would love to hear from somebody from Mexico exactly what it means when you use that. Because if you look it up on Google, it can mean like asshole or dumbass or bastard or a whole bunch of different things. But I have a feeling that it's much nastier than any of those words. And it might be one of those situations where there's no direct English translation that completely captures all the dynamics of cabron, because it's used sometimes affectionately between friends, like, oh my God, I haven't seen you so long, cabron. And other times it's like, get the fuck out of my face, cabron. So if anybody out there is bilingual or just speaks Spanish really, really well, let me know what that is all about, because the word must be used 700 times in the film and it was delightful. But anyway, I just found it interesting that the word was never actually translated in the film in the subtitles. It's a little bit like when guys from England call each other cunt, where they're like, oh my God, I fucking love you. You're like, you're such a cunt. And it's like, whoa, like in America, that word's like really hardcore, but in other countries, they use it in a completely different way. And I imagine that cabron is along those same lines. But getting back to the movie at large, I imagine that a lot of people are going to really struggle with the experimental style and the length, but what cannot be denied by anybody is that this is one of those movies where the director is employing every single technique imaginable visually and in terms of like the soundtrack to try to give us the most immersive, just mind-boggling experience imaginable. The way he'll experiment with the soundtrack, the way he'll experiment with like interior monologues versus dialogue, every single scene is so surprising and so delightful, and it's like, oh my God, like what is he gonna throw at us next? It never feels stale. It never feels slow. Even though I feel like some people are probably gonna criticize it for exactly that, I'm just gonna say that I disagree, and I can't wait to watch it again. I can't believe that I have to wait weeks to see it again. This might be the film that Iñárritu is best known for whenever his career draws to a close. I think it's that good, but it's going to divide people because a lot of people who watch Netflix are not in the mood for 2.5, 3 hour experimental, introspective, artistic masterpieces. It's just, that's not the audience that Netflix has cultivated. But once again, Netflix has this strange habit of getting behind these really groundbreaking filmmakers from time to time, and I'm fully for it. They're obviously chasing awards and respectability and that sort of thing, but it seems like of all the major platforms in the world, if you want to make an R-rated, highbrow, art house film that might possibly appeal to a much larger audience, it might be the best platform in the world to take a big creative swing. Whether or not that swing connects is up to the viewer to decide, but there's no denying that they keep giving opportunities like this to filmmakers, and I applaud them for being a platform where somebody like Scorsese can make The Irishman, or where Andrew Dominik can make Blonde, or where Iñárritu can make Bardo. I mean, look at HBO Max, look at Hulu, look at Disney Plus. I mean, look at Peacock. These kinds of movies are not going to get made on those platforms. And the fact that Netflix is making such a strong international play, whether that's with films and shows from South Korea, or whatever the case might be, I think because subscriber growth has kind of stagnated or reached a saturation point in America, and obviously now, in order for Netflix to grow, they have to expand internationally. And the only way you're going to do that is by looking for the best filmmakers in the world, making films in different languages, which I think is going to give Netflix a massive advantage compared to their competition in the years to come, except for maybe a place like Apple, where they just have so much buying power. They'll probably be giving opportunities to filmmakers like that as well. So I'm starting to run out of things that I can say without giving anything away. But I'll just say, watch the trailer. And if you think, oh, this looks like dreamlike, meandering nonsense, once again, the dreamlike imagery and all the crazy shit you see, it all has a massive payoff and impact or dividends in the latter part of the film where you'll sit back and just be floored by how something that's so unwieldy and so meandering that it's all able to kind of coalesce and come together so effectively. And when I look at the filmography of Iñárritu overall, I mean, when he made Amores Perros back in 2000, it was such a bold, groundbreaking, just kick-ass, intense directorial debut. But I have to admit, 21 Grams, Babel, and Beautiful, I saw all of them one time each. Not one of them really kind of rattled my cage or really got me on board. I barely remember them. I should probably go back and revisit them. I mean, 21 Grams, that's almost 20 years ago. But it's with Birdman, The Revenant, and Bardo, False Chronicle of a Handful of Truths, that everything seems to have really come together. Also, what's the deal with these long-ass titles? I mean, Birdman was Birdman or The Unexpected Virtue of Ignorance. Bardo is Bardo, False Chronicle of a Handful of Truths. That's a mouthful. It's hard to write all that in a YouTube review, but if he wants to, I mean, once again, I'm only being half serious. My advice to Iñárritu is stay weird, stick to your guns, stick to your creative instincts, because over the last 10 years, he has proven himself time and time again to be one of the most original and intense and visceral and exciting and imaginative and experimental directors in the world. And I hope he continues to make movies for many more years to come. And one more thing I should mention about Iñárritu is that this guy knows his film history. And I'm not going to claim that knowing your film history automatically will help you become a great filmmaker. However, I've always been fascinated by directors who are complete and total movie junkies. And by studying their influences and the directors they like, that's been the way that I've managed to discover some of my all-time favorite films. And you'll see a lot of influence of these directors on this movie. I mean, some people are going to look at this and say, oh, this is kind of what they were doing with the French New Wave in the early 60s. Oh, but this is kind of what they were doing with Italian cinema in the late 50s, early 60s. But here's a list of some of his favorite filmmakers, which I found over at Wikipedia. But Max O'Fools, sadly kind of a forgotten director these days, but in the 40s and early 50s, good God, he was amazing. Robert Altman, Sidney Lumet, Ingmar Bergman, Federico Fellini, Luis Buñuel. You'll feel that influence heavily, especially Buñuel's films from the 70s. Andrei Tarkovsky, Sergio Leone, one of my personal faves, Martin Scorsese, and John Cassavetes. That is a murderer's row of great directors. And if you're a youngin' and you haven't watched movies by those filmmakers, anyway, prepare for just an ocean of astonishing film masterworks that are absolutely going to change your life. But before I go, I got to switch gears a little bit and bring you a message from Manscaped, the official sponsor of my podcast, Wrong Reel. Both Thanksgiving and Christmas are right around the corner, so it's not too early for me to start begging and pleading for people to support my sponsor, which is a great way to support this channel and my podcast. But here is the message that they have for you. This holiday season, I'll be giving thanks to our friends over at Manscaped. Everyone loves turkey and stuffing, but you'll be looking like dessert with the help of Manscaped's Performance Package 4.0. The leaders in below-the-waist grooming have blessed you with the ultimate Thanksgiving dinner topic. Tell your in-laws about your new cutting-edge ball trimmer and gift yourself or the man in your life the ultimate men's hygiene bundle. Trim your pumpkins by going to manscaped.com and use the code WRONGREEL in all caps for free shipping and 20% off. Inside, you'll find their Lawnmower 4.0 trimmer, Weed Whacker, ear and nose hair trimmer, Crop Preserver ball deodorant, Crop Reviver toner, Performance boxer briefs, and a travel bag to hold your goodies. Think of it as a cornucopia for your balls. So I hope Iñárritu won't mind my including a little advertising with my review of his amazing new movie. I'll be very curious to hear what people have to say about his films. And if you have seen the trailer and you're intrigued and you're unfamiliar with his work, start with the Amores Perros and just work your way forward. But I think, Amores Perros, Birdman, and The Revenant are my three faves, but I really do need to go back and revisit his other films, Beautiful, Babel, and 21 Grams, to have a real firm grasp of what the earlier part of his career is all about. But if you enjoyed this video, please remember to like the video, subscribe to the channel, hit that notification bell, and if you want to talk more about international cinema, give me a shout over at Twitter at Geeking Out. But I can't thank you enough for watching the video. I really appreciate it, but more importantly, as always, onwards and upwards.